London, the Savoy Hotel café. It's a March morning when everything collapses. James Thornton, 34 years old, worth $3.8 billion, sits opposite the woman he's loved for 3 years. He's just pretended to have lost everything to test Victoria's true love. But when she looks at the photo of his 5-year-old daughter that he's just shown her and speaks words he never could have imagined, James's world crumbles. Because sometimes the truth we seek is the one that destroys us, and James is about to discover that love, when it's false, can be crueler than any enemy. The Savoy Hotel Café overlooking the Thames was the perfect place for a conversation that would change everything. The elegant windows filtered the London morning light, whilst the aroma of freshly roasted coffee mingled with the discreet murmur of business and romantic conversations. James Thornton sat at table number 12, the one he'd reserved for special occasions over the past 3 years. At 34, he was one of Britain's wealthiest men, heir to a property empire transformed into an international luxury conglomerate. His fortune of $3.8 billion made him one of the most eligible bachelors in the country. But for 3 years, his heart had beaten for only one woman: Victoria Clark. Victoria arrived with her usual natural elegance, chestnut brown wavy hair, green eyes that always seemed to hide a secret, the smile that had captivated James at their first meeting. She wore a beige coat, a designer handbag that James had given her, shoes that cost more than most people's monthly salary. For weeks, a doubt had tormented James. Did Victoria truly love him, or did she love his wealth? His friends had warned him, his financial advisors had conducted discreet checks, but James had always defended the purity of their love. Until he decided to put everything to the test, James began his calculated lie. He had lost everything. The company had gone bankrupt. Debts and wrong investments had completely ruined him. He had nothing left. Had to start from scratch, perhaps move away and find an ordinary job. The silence that followed was so dense that James could hear his own heartbeat. Victoria stared at him, her face shifting from surprise to confusion, then to something James couldn't yet decipher. James studied every micro-expression on Victoria's face. He searched for desperation for him, concern for their future together, words of encouragement. He searched for the love that conquers all. Instead, he saw something that froze his blood. Victoria lowered her gaze, nervously playing with the 100,000-pound ring he had given her. She said she needed time to think, to understand what this all meant for them. James felt the first blow to his heart. Not, "We'll face this together." Not, "I love you anyway." But, "I need to think." But the worst was yet to come. James pulled out a photograph. Him together with a 5-year-old girl with blonde hair and blue eyes, smiling in a park. The girl was called Emma. She was his cousin's daughter. But Victoria didn't know that. James lied ruthlessly. He had always known he had a daughter. Her mother had died last year in an accident. Now Emma lived with him and was all he had left. Victoria looked at the photograph as if it were a venomous snake. Her green eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly, and James saw something he had never seen before on the face of the woman he loved. Pure disgust. James had studied every detail of this lie. Emma was indeed his cousin Sarah's daughter, and had truly lost her mother, but lived happily with her father in Manchester. James had used a photo of them together, taken during the last family Christmas. When James asked if she would like to meet Emma, perhaps during the weekend, Victoria placed the photo on the table with determination. She said it was all too much. Too much at once. First him ruined, then a daughter. She couldn't handle all this. James's heart began to truly break. Not because of the fiction he had created, but because of the reality that was revealing itself. The woman for whom he had fantasized about marriages and a family was crumbling at the first invented obstacle. Victoria confessed that she had had expectations about their relationship. Expectations that now she didn't know if they could be fulfilled. She spoke of future plans she had imagined. Marriage, travels, beautiful houses, freedom. And instead, he had a daughter, and now didn't even have money to support her. The truth, raw and ruthless, exploded between them like a bomb. Victoria wasn't speaking about love. She was speaking about a business plan for her own life, and James had been the perfect client until 5 minutes ago. When James asked directly if she loved him only for his money, Victoria defended herself, saying it wasn't that simple. Money wasn't everything, but one had to be realistic. Love alone wasn't enough to live on. And a child. She wasn't ready to be a mother. Didn't even know if she ever would be. James looked at this woman he had considered the love of his life and saw a stranger. How had he failed to see who she really was? How had he fallen in love with an illusion? When he asked what would happen if he managed to recover, to rebuild everything, Victoria looked at him with something resembling pity. She told him he was 34 years old, had a child to raise, no money, no prospects. She was 28, still young. She couldn't throw away her life for... She didn't finish the sentence, but there was no need. The message was clear. James had become a burden, an obstacle to her dreams of wealth and freedom. In that moment, James Thornton, the man who possessed one of the largest fortunes in Britain, felt truly poor for the first time in his life. James remained seated at the café table as if he had been struck by lightning. Victoria's words continued to echo in his head like painful echoes of a truth he didn't want to accept. Around him, the world continued to move. The clinking of cups, the laughter of other customers, the traffic noise from the Strand. But for him, everything was still, frozen in that moment of devastating revelation. His breathing had become short, as if the very air of the café had become dense and unbreathable. He felt his pulse beating in his temples, a dull hammering that accompanied the collapse of everything he had believed in for 3 years. His hands trembled slightly whilst he still held Emma's photo, that innocent child who had involuntarily acted as a catalyst to reveal Victoria's true nature. Victoria continued with a forcedly sweet voice, but James now heard every falsehood in that melody that once enchanted him. She said she had to think about her position, that she had always dreamed of a certain life, a family born from true love, not complications from the past. Every word was like a nail driven into James's heart. Complications from the past. That's how she had defined a 5-year-old child. James looked again at Emma's photo, that sweet, innocent child with blonde hair and blue eyes who smiled carefree in a park. He realized that Victoria had failed on every possible front. She had not only shown no love for him in difficulties, but had shown inhuman coldness towards a child she believed to be his daughter. Victoria's voice continued, but now James heard it as if it came from far away. She spoke of deserving something different, of not being able to give up her dreams. James realized she was describing their relationship as an investment gone wrong, not as a love story that had ended. When James insisted on asking what would be best for both of them, Victoria avoided his gaze for the first time in the conversation. Her green eyes, which he had always thought were deep like mysterious lakes, now seemed cold as ice to him. She looked out the window, towards the luxury shops on Bond Street, and James understood that her gaze was already seeking a future without him. Victoria said he should concentrate on his daughter, rebuild his life, find a woman more suited to his new situation, and she had to think about her own future, deserved someone who could give her stability, security. He couldn't help but notice how the words stability and security sounded like synonyms for money in her mouth. A woman more suited to his new situation. A poor woman for a poor man. The classism in Victoria's words was so evident that James wondered how he had failed to notice it before. Perhaps because when you're on the other side of the barricade, when you're the one with the money, it's easy not to see the mechanisms of interest that surround you. It's comfortable to believe that the world loves you for what you are, not for what you have. James felt a stab in his stomach when he realized how many other people in his life might be there for the same reasons. How many of his friends, his colleagues, the people who frequented his estate in the Cotswolds were genuine. The doubt spread like an oil stain, contaminating every memory, every relationship. When James asked her directly if that child in the photo could never have been part of a proper family, Victoria's silence was more eloquent than any answer. She bit her lower lip, a gesture that James had always found seductive, but which now seemed to him the nervous tick of someone calculating the best response. James understood that for Victoria, Emma represented everything she didn't want: responsibilities, sacrifices, renunciations, a complication to the perfect life she had planned. It wasn't just a matter of not being ready to be a mother. It was a matter of not even wanting to consider the idea of loving someone who came with additional packages. The café around them continued its normal life. A businessman at the next table was talking on the phone about a corporate merger. A tourist couple was leafing through a London guide. An elderly woman was reading The Times. Everyone was living their normal lives, whilst his was crumbling piece by piece. Victoria stood up from the table with studied movements, taking the Hermès bag he had given her for their second anniversary. Every gesture was elegant, controlled, perfect, as always. But now James saw the performance behind every movement. She said it was better to take a break, that she needed time to think. He had to sort out his situation. His situation. Not his daughter, not his family, not his life. His situation, as if it were a logistical problem to solve, a setback in the planning of her own existence. Before leaving, Victoria turned one last time. The Louboutin heels, also a gift from James, echoed on the cafe's marble like a countdown. She said she had truly loved him, but love sometimes wasn't enough. She had to be realistic. James watched her walk away between the café tables, pass in front of the glittering shop windows of the Strand, disappear into the crowd of elegant Londoners and tourists dazzled by luxury. For a moment he had the impulse to run after her, to shout that it was all false, that he still had all his billions, that they could return to their perfect life. But he didn't do it, because he had understood that that perfect life had been perfect only on the surface. Underneath, there was emptiness, falsehood, interest disguised as passion. James remained sitting alone, with Emma's photo in his hands.
Gefällt dir diese Geschichte? Gib einen Like und abonnier den Kanal. Jetzt geht's weiter mit dem Video.
The waiter approached discreetly to ask if he desired anything else. James shook his head and left a £50 tip for 2 coffees. The waiter thanked him with surprise, and James realized that was the first genuine reaction he had seen that day. He called his driver, but then changed his mind. He needed to walk, to breathe, to feel the weight of his steps on the marble pavement of the Strand. Whilst he waited, he looked again at Emma's photo. That innocent child had been involuntarily the instrument that had revealed the truth to him. A truth that hurt, that broke his heart. But that was necessary. For 3 years he had loved a ghost, a projection of what he wanted to see. The real Victoria was a person who would abandon a man in his moment of need, who saw children as obstacles to her projects, who measured love based on the figures in the bank account. When he finally left the café, James noticed that London seemed different to him. The luxury shop windows, the elegant buildings, the expensive cars parked along the avenues. Everything now appeared to him like a theatrical set, beautiful but empty, glittering but cold. The test was over, and he had failed, not because he hadn't passed the test, but because he had chosen the wrong person to subject to it. He had spent 3 years building a sand castle, believing it was made of stone. Whilst walking home, James felt something he hadn't felt for a long time. True loneliness, but also a strange form of freedom. He was alone, yes, but he was also free. Free from the lies, from the illusions, from the daily performances of a love that had never existed. The pain was real, heart-wrenching, but so was the truth. And perhaps, thought James, looking at London's grey sky, the truth was the only solid foundation on which one could build something authentic. James spent the following days in a state of emotional numbness. Back in his penthouse overlooking Hyde Park, he realized how empty and cold that luxury was without someone to truly share it with. Every expensive object seemed to accuse him. He had built a golden cage to attract love, but had only attracted interest. On Friday evening, he received a message from Victoria. She had reflected a great deal and wanted to see him. She had something important to tell him. James stared at the message for long minutes. Part of him hoped she had reconsidered, but another part, the wounded but wiser one, knew that Victoria probably had other intentions. They met again at the Savoy Café. Victoria arrived more beautiful than ever, dressed in a new dress, hair perfectly styled, flawless makeup, the smile that once melted him but now seemed calculated to him. Victoria said she had understood that she had been too harsh. True love meant staying together in difficulties, facing challenges together. She had thought that perhaps they could find a solution, even for the child. James felt his heart accelerate, but something in Victoria's tone didn't convince him. When he asked what kind of solution, she leaned towards him, taking his hands. She said he was intelligent and capable, would surely find a way to recover, and she wanted to be by his side. Regarding Emma, Victoria smiled with cold eyes. She had thought that perhaps the best thing for the child would be a more appropriate environment, a good boarding school where she could receive the best education, so they could concentrate on rebuilding without distractions. James felt his stomach twist. Victoria wanted to send his daughter to boarding school, remove the obstacle. She hadn't returned for love, but because she had calculated that it suited her to stay with a rich man temporarily in difficulties. James decided to reveal the truth. He pulled out his wallet and placed his black credit card on the table, the one reserved for fortunes over 100 million. Then he showed the bank account with an 8-figure sum. He explained that he had never lost anything. The company was doing better than ever. Emma's story was false. She was his niece. Everything had been a test to see who she really was. Victoria's face went from confusion to shock, then to anger. She asked how he could lie to her like that. James replied that he wanted to see if she loved him for what he was or for what he had. Victoria exploded, calling him mad. James replied that perhaps he was, but at least now he knew the truth. Victoria left, slamming the door, but not before saying she hoped he was happy with his paranoia and mind games. She deserved better. James replied that yes, she deserved someone as rich as him, but stupid enough not to realize what she really was. He remained seated, looking at the credit card on the table. He had spent 3 years and his heart to discover a truth that his friends had understood in 3 days. But perhaps it had been the most valuable lesson of his life. In the months that followed, James went through what he would later define as the most difficult but also most enlightening period of his life. He decided to take a break from London's social world, from those society events where he always met the same faces that smiled at his money. One day, walking through Notting Hill, he entered a small, independent bookshop. He had never been there before. He usually ordered books online. But that afternoon, he simply wanted to walk and breathe. Behind the counter was a woman in her 30s, curly hair in a messy bun, reading glasses on her head. A genuine smile that wasn't trying to sell anything. She wore jeans and a t-shirt saying, "Books are therapy." Her name was Emma, James discovered, and she had left a job at a major publishing house to open this bookshop. She wanted a place where books were still magic, not just products. James began to frequent the bookshop regularly. He never said his surname, never spoke about his work. For Emma, he was simply James, a customer who loved reading and who gradually became a friend. Emma didn't know who he was, had never Googled his name, had never asked questions about his financial means. When James arrived by taxi instead of with his driver, she didn't notice. When he wore jeans and jumpers instead of designer clothes, she seemed to appreciate him more. One afternoon, whilst they were drinking tea and discussing a novel, Emma asked him if he was always so sad. He had that look of someone who had lost something important. James answered honestly that he had lost something important, or rather, had discovered he had never had it. Emma nodded without asking further questions, without morbid curiosity. She said that sometimes losses were disguised gains, that freed you from things you thought you wanted, but that actually harmed you. That evening, James returned home, and for the first time in months, truly smiled. Emma knew nothing about his story with Victoria, didn't know about the test he had done, had no idea about his fortune. Yet she had hit the nail on the head. Perhaps Victoria had truly been a gain disguised as a loss. Perhaps all the pain had served to bring him to that bookshop, to meet someone who saw him for what he was, not for what he possessed. For the first time in months, James began to think that perhaps true love really existed, only that it was found in places where you had never looked for it. 2 years after the test that had destroyed his relationship with Victoria, James found himself once again sitting at table number 12 of the Savoy Café. But this time he wasn't alone, and above all, he wasn't there to test anyone. Emma sat opposite him, her curly hair catching the morning light, her eyes shining whilst she told him about the latest book presentation in her bookshop. She wore a simple dress that she had bought with her own money, honestly earned selling stories and dreams. James watched her speak and felt that peace he had never experienced with Victoria. With Emma, he didn't have to pretend to be different, didn't have to hide or reveal anything. He was simply James, and that was enough. James decided that the time had come to reveal everything to her. He told her that he wasn't what she believed, that his surname was Thornton. James Thornton. Emma remained silent for a moment, then asked if she should recognize that name. James explained that he was rather wealthy. Very wealthy. Billions, to be precise. Emma looked at him for long seconds, then burst out laughing. Him? The bloke who came to the bookshop on the tube and got emotional reading Dickens? He was a billionaire? When Emma asked why he was telling her now, He pulled out a small blue velvet box and placed it on the table. He wanted to ask her to marry him, and thought she should know what she was getting into. James told her that he loved her for how she read poetry aloud, for how she got excited when someone bought a book she loved, for how she looked at him when he told her about his days. He loved her because in 2 years she had never asked him what he did for a living, because it was enough for her that he was happy. Emma looked at the box, then raised her eyes to him, asking what would happen if she said no, if she refused to marry a billionaire. James replied that he would love her even more, and would ask her if she wanted to marry simply James, the one who got emotional with Dickens. Emma opened the box. The ring was beautiful but not ostentatious, elegant without being vulgar, perfect for her. She said it was beautiful, but she had one condition: prenuptial agreement. She didn't want a single penny of his money. Her bookshop, her independence, her life had to remain hers. She would marry James the reader, not James the billionaire. James looked at her and understood he had found what he had been searching for all his life without knowing it. Not a woman who wanted to share his wealth, but a woman who wanted to preserve her own poverty to be with him. Whilst James slipped the ring on her finger, he thought about Victoria. He wondered if she had ever managed to find her perfect rich man, if she was happy in her life of calculations and conveniences. Then he stopped thinking about it, because Emma was already asking about Emma and the story that had brought them there. Some tests destroy everything. Others, like James's, destroy everything that is false to make room for what is true. And sometimes, destruction is the most beautiful gift that life can give you. Did this story move you? Did it make you reflect on what love really is and how much appearances can deceive? If you too believe that true love doesn't look at the bank account, that the right people love you for what you are and not for what you have, and that sometimes it's necessary to lose everything to understand what's really worth keeping, give a like and share this video. Tell us in the comments, have you ever suspected that someone loved you only for interest? Do you think James was right to test Victoria? Do you think true love still exists in a world where everything seems to be measured in money? Subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the deeper sides of love, the difference between appearance and reality, and the courage to be authentic in a world full of masks. Like, comment, share. Because every story reminds us that the greatest wealth is being loved for who we are, that the truth always hurts but sets us free, and that sometimes pretending to be poor can reveal who are truly rich in heart.